Good morning, one and all. I, Miss Ragini Tare, on behalf of Institute for Oriental Studies, Thane, welcome you all. Today, we have a very special event lined up, a guest lecture on the historicity of Ramayana and Mahabharata. This promises to be an enlightening session where we delve into the fascinating world of history of the Ramayana and Mahabharata and explore the various ways of interpreting Indian history. Proceeding further, I would like to give a brief introduction of Institute for Oriental Studies, Thane. Institute for Oriental Studies is a voluntary organization working for the promotion of Indian culture since 1983. To achieve its objectives, the Institute has been conducting conferences, workshops, exhibitions, film shows, and educational tours. We have a small museum with 900 different artifacts and 600 coins of different eras. Our research library also has an enormous collection of around 80,000 books and 3,500 manuscripts. On this occasion, I would request VPM's chairperson, Dr. Vijay Bedekar sir, to welcome and felicitate our today's guest speaker, Mr. Nilesh Oak sir. I request Dr. Vijay Bedekar sir to welcome and felicitate Mr. Franklin Award. I request Vice Principal Professor Subhash Shinde sir to welcome and felicitate Dr. Vijay Bedekar sir. Thank you, sir. I request Ankur Kane sir to felicitate Vice Principal Professor Subhash Shinde sir. Thank you, sir. I request Ankur Kane sir to felicitate Mrs. Sumedha Bedekar madam. I now request Dr. Vijay Bedekar sir to kindly give us his blessings.
Well, friends, uh, you know that we all are anxious to listen to him. So, without wasting a single minute, I will request him to start his speech.
Moving ahead, it is my honor to introduce our today's guest speaker, Mr. Nilesh Oak sir. Nilesh Neelkantha Oak is an author, original researcher, GAIA and TEDx speaker, UAA ICT Distinguished Alumnus, and sought after keynote speaker. He holds a BS and MS in Chemical Engineering and an Executive MBA. He has published three revolutionary books. First, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? The Historic Ram and Bhishma Nirvana. His books have been and are being translated into various other languages. He travels extensively around the world, speaking to university and college students and to mainstream audiences. His work has inspired novels, novelettes, documentaries, and movies. He helps individuals become aware of the deep wisdom and antiquity of Indian civilization so that they truly comprehend, present, or defend the grand narrative of this civilization, unlike most other Indic researchers, because he builds it through scientific acumen and logical reasoning. He is a researcher and adjunct faculty at the Institute of Advanced Sciences, Dartmouth, Massachusetts, USA. With such a distinguished guest in our midst, I have no doubt that today's lecture will be both insightful and thought provoking. I request the dignitaries to kindly get seated in the front so that we can start with our lecture. Please join me once again in welcoming Mr. Nilesh Oak sir.
नेक्स्ट कराय सांगावं लागेल देता Namaskar. Can everyone hear me well? Okay, good. Okay, how's this? Better? Okay. Okay. So I'm going to speak in English. Okay. We also have a guest. Well, guest for Thane, not for me. We both share the same city back in USA. I just came to know, just a coincident yoga yog. How many of you here understand Marathi? By the way? ओके सो ज्याला आपण योगा योग म्हणतो त्या दृष्टीनं ते आले आणि तेही अटलांटाचे आहेत ते डिकेटरमध्ये राहतात मी मॅरिएटा ईस्ट कॉपमध्ये राहतो दिस इज मराठी 101 फॉर यू ओके so thank you everyone for coming generally anytime okay we have that generally anytime a speaker stands up and you are in the audience and of course I've been in the audience all the time I don't know about you guys but everyone okay with English? Yeah. I don't know about you guys, but I always have this big knot in my stomach, the fear. How long this guy is going to talk? Because many times we know the person starts and never stops. Okay. So just to give you an idea, I'm going to go for about 40 to 50 minutes, very likely 50 minutes. There's a lot of ground to cover. Think of this also as a movie trailer. This is a trailer, this is a preview, a 50-minute long preview. But the idea is if you like what you hear, then there is so much material out there about my research, in terms of books, in terms of blog articles, in terms of videos. These days, very few people read books, but there are books, blogs, also you need to read them. And then there are 1,000+ videos of mine in a YouTube. On that count, let me ask you, before coming here today, how many of you had either read a book of mine or a blog article of mine or have watched like a one full YouTube episode of mine? Okay. So just hold it there so I can do the calculation. I'll tell you how statistics works, okay? So yeah, this was like a 41.27%. Okay, so those who have read it. So the way I have created a presentation, it will sort of ground you everyone. But those who have not raised your hand, so therefore you have not seen it, there is a lot of homework for you beginning tonight. Okay, there is a lot more ground to cover. So sort of create a basis. So I'll go fast through some of these. I'm not going fast to deliberately confuse you, but just to cover a sufficient ground so that you are excited enough, hopefully, to get excited to do your homework. Okay? Swadhyaya Pravachanecha. So actually, whatever you watch, then you also want to tell other person, and that is even for your own benefit. Because when you try to explain to someone, your knowledge of whatever you have seen, read, actually gets pretty good. Okay. Can everyone see on that slide? Is there a way to make a bigger slide or make the whole screen? Yeah. Can we? I mean, I don't know if there is a lot of complexity. Two, has to be two. Okay. So everyone can see that screen there? Excellent. Okay. So that's what we are going to do, scientific dating of Mahabharata and Ramayana. Everyone familiar with Mahabharata and Ramayana? I'll just take that as an assumption, okay? The basics of it, the basics of the story also we know. We don't need to know the story to understand the dating of it. What you see there is just a quick summary of about 30 years of my research, okay? For example, what you see, that horizontal thing is the x-axis of time. And you are going to see a lot of graphs, but every time you will notice this. In fact, I was in Chhatrapati Sambhaji Nagar not that long ago, right in this month. And the girl, a very bright engineering girl, who summarized my talk in like 2 minutes, she said, okay, this is about Ramayana, this is about Mahabharata, this is about the astronomy evidence. And she said, every graph that you see, that we see in this presentation, the x-axis is axis of time. So kind of that just a clue. Anytime you see a graph, very likely the x-axis is axis of time. Against this background, my 30 years of work, so today is where we are, 21st century. Zero is going back to the beginning of a Julian/Gregorian calendar, okay, related with the birth of Jesus, okay. And further back, you see minus 5K, minus 10K, minus 15K. Everyone understands what they are? 5K is 5000 BCE. 10,000 BCE, like before Common Era. Okay, so before Christ. But in the Jewish academics in America, they said, okay, well, secular, like we hear the word here. So instead of before Christ, that's exactly what the calendar is, but call it before common era. It means the same thing. So if you are saying something 5000 BCE, that means it happened about 7000 years ago. Everyone understands that? Yes, no? Okay. So against this timeline, what I showed based on my work, and we are going to look at some summary of it, is that the Mahabharata, okay, the great war of Mahabharata and the events associated with that happened about 7500 years ago. And specifically the year of Mahabharata war that lasted for 18 days occurred in the year 5561 BCE. The evidence in the Mahabharata text is rich enough and sufficient to actually allow us to find out the specific days of the war. Now, this is not always possible. It depends on the kind of evidence we have. Okay. But in this case, we can say it started, Julian calendar extended into antiquity, 16th October, and it lasted until 2nd November, 5561 BCE. And we'll see how we went about that. Fast forward, going backward, about 12,209 BC, so approximately 14,000 years ago, that's when Ramayana happened. So in case of Mahabharata, Mahabharata has about 300 plus astronomy descriptions. And how many of you have played a jigsaw puzzle? Most of you? Like the map of a Maharashtra and the individual districts putting together. How many of you play Shabda Koda, crossword puzzle? Okay, you are going, this is a cakewalk for you guys. Okay, just like Shabda Koda, what do we do? Crossword puzzle. Like initially you open the newspaper or wherever you solve it, initially feels like, oh, I'm not sure if I'm going to crack this up today. And initially it may feel tough, but once you get 2 or 3 words, then slowly the word starts coming to you, okay, and then you solve it. It is like that. Imagine solving a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle together. So those 300 different astronomy descriptions come together and point to that 5561 BCE. In case of Ramayana, this actually surprised me because Ramayana is much smaller in comparison to Mahabharata, almost like a 1/4 or 1/5 the size of Mahabharata. But Ramayana has many more astronomy descriptions, actually close to 600 astronomy descriptions throughout the text of Valmiki Ramayana. And again, if you solve them together as if like solving a jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle, but in a scientific fashion, and we'll talk about that briefly, it points you to that specific year 12,209 BCE as the year of Ram Ravan Yuddha. And then I use those additional 600 references, chronology references to go back to when they went to Vanvas, when Bhagwan Ram was born, and so on and so forth. Everyone with me? Okay. And then if you go further, and this is where I'm going to stop for today's discussion, but the discussion doesn't have to stop there. There is a huge timeline we can go back in antiquity. But both Ramayana and Mahabharata talk of Rigveda, or actually all 4 Vedas, by the way. If you have some idea, because I also was under that misconception that Ramayana and Mahabharata talk of only 3 Vedas. Have you heard that? And people quote something like Traigunya, Vishaya Veda, so Nistraigunya Bhavarjuna, or Sattu, Ruk, Sama, Yaju. Generally, you see the list. But actually, if you read Ramayana and Mahabharata in detail, you will find all 4 Vedas are mentioned. Okay, so but just take Rigveda for a reference because that is the key Veda. Both Ramayana and Mahabharata mention Rigveda, which means if Ramayana is 14,000 years ago, Mahabharata is 7,500 years ago, the Rigveda has to be before that. And if you look at the Rigveda descriptions, and if you can scientifically, in objective testing fashion, you can do it, it takes you, I am not saying, listen carefully, I am not saying Rigveda was composed 21,000 years ago. I am saying Rigveda is definitely older than 21,000 years ago. So that greater than sign is for that. Okay. We are not going to talk of Rigveda today. We'll just focus on Ramayana and Mahabharata. Okay. So that's the quick summary. So let's talk of Mahabharata. How many of you have read Mahabharata? Some portion of it. Okay. So we have an extremely knowledgeable audience here. Okay. Again, I'm not going to ask any questions. No test. Huh? All right. So consistency of the text, because see, that question is important. Because when finally I show you the evidence, then people say, but hold on, how do you know that we can trust what is written in Mahabharata? That is a very important question, but we need to answer that first. Now, we don't have to answer by some proof. We can take it on a leap of faith. Okay. So when we are reading some book, for example, how many of you right now believe that what is happening right now in this room, or the feeling, this is not a dream? How many of you feel this is not a dream? This is really happening in the daytime? Okay, good. Some people are like, I'm not sure. In reality, there is, I mean, we have a psychotherapist here. Okay. In reality, there is no clear way of truly proving that this is not a dream, if you think of it. Because it can happen. Maybe you are sitting in a auditorium. Yesterday night, you have this feeling, this morning, I am going to go to Joshi Bedekar College and listen to the talk. And the next thing is alarm goes off and he says, oh my God, I am late. And you may just wake up. My point is, some things we actually take it on a Shraddha. Okay, so you can take it on a Shraddha. So just want to sort of clear that notion. So this is like a Mahabharata text from Gita Press. The text that comes to us is actually at least a fourth recension. So what Vyasadeva wrote, he taught to his disciples. Okay, now these his disciples taught to their disciples. One of the Vyasa's disciple, Vaishampayan, yeah, he was narrating during the Sarpasatra to Janmejaya. Now who is Janmejaya? Son of Parikshit. Parikshit is the son of Abhimanyu. Abhimanyu is the son of Arjun. So you know that connection. So Vaishampayan told to Janmejaya, when that was going on, just like this lecture is going on, in the audience there was another individual, many individuals, but another individual, Roma Harshana Sauti. So he listened to it. Okay. And then he goes to Naimisharanya, and there is another yajna is going on with a Shaunak as a head rishi. And Shaunaka says, where did you come from? He says, well, I came from Janmejaya's Sarpasatra. What did you talk about? Oh, we talked about Mahabharata. We recited Mahabharata. Can you recite that for us? Can you discuss that? And Romarshan Sauti says that to the sages of Naimisharanya. Whoever documented that is what has come to us. Okay, so therefore you see Vyasa Uvacha, Vaishampayan Uvacha, Sauti Uvacha, Shaunaka Uvacha, you will see that. Okay, so that's just a background of it. And we are going to look at all this evidence. Geography, this may surprise some of you. I think everyone knows that all parts of India, people came and fought in the Mahabharata war. That most of you know. But see, this is not the India of 2025 we are discussing. This is an Indian cultural landscape of about 7,500 years ago. So why timing is important? Some people say there are these all philosophical, adhyatmic values in Mahabharata. Of course, they are important. In fact, that is the purpose of it. What is the definition of itihasa? Dharmartha kama mokshanam upadesham samanvitam purvavrittam kathayuktam itihasam prachakshate. That thing is called itihasa, which takes a historical event, purvavrittam, but tells us in a kathayukta form, in a very entertaining, educational form. And what is the objective? So that it becomes a guidebook, upadesham samanvitam. For what? The char purushartha, dharma, artha, kama, moksha. Okay, so that is there. The purpose is actually there. But it is a historical event. The point is, when you understand the timing, Desha, Kala, Patra, three words you might have heard, the time, place, and the context. When you know the context, you understand it better. And again, if you have a time in the question answer, I will elaborate, but I want to move on. So the folks who have come and fought in the Mahabharata war, if you read Mahabharata, now with this drishti, you may go back. Those of you who have already read Mahabharata, you may go back and read it again. Where are the people have coming from? Some people have come as far as Syria in the west and as far as Indonesia in the east. And some cases, the description is not very clear. Exactly the location that is mentioned, where would we note it down on the map today? We just don't know. But these are very clear. Ballika, in the case of context of Mahabharata, how many of you have heard the word Ballik? Like a Ballik king come and fighting. You can even go to, I have been to, other than Australia and New Zealand, I have been everywhere around the world, okay? Ballik, there is a river Ballik in Syria. And if you talk to the Syrians, even today, after all this, the torture that Syrians have gone through, you'll be amazed to know that they still retain their connections. In the oil and gas, and some connection I had gone, and a very old serious Syrian gentleman like looked at me. He said, "Oh, you are from India?" And he said, "Do you know the meaning of Syria?" So I said, "No, just tell me." He says, "We call it," meaning they call it Surya. Okay, and I said, "Oh, are you saying something about the sun? Because in Surya, kind of, we understand Surya." He said, "That's right." So they until like not that far ago, like this is maybe 20 years ago I was there, that they had this very clear notion that they are from the members or descendants of solar dynasty. Okay, that was there. And in the East. But just keep this in mind when we talk about the genetic evidence in support of the Mahabharata dating, you need to know this. Think of from Syria, the west of India, east of India, and the India proper. Can you do that for 20 minutes? Okay, so I'll pull that information again. Okay, let's go next. Finding the year of Mahabharat war. This is like, the time is infinite. How many of you have been to Ujjain? Okay, Mahakal, right? Ujjain is a Mahakal. In the mathematical language, you know what that is? That is the line with the arrows on the both sides. Infinity to infinity. It doesn't stop. But we cannot talk of Mahakal because we have to start somewhere, stop somewhere. So we call it Khandakal. Just like in the mathematics, we take a piece from that line and then make a triangle, okay? So somewhere we have to start. So actually it's an infinite time within which we have to look for a specific year. So that's truly like, the phrase, looking for a needle in a haystack? गवताच्या गंजीमध्ये सुई शोधून काढायचे. Okay, it's a needle in a haystack. But there is one more important question we should ask. Are you searching for in the right place to begin with? Which is to say, are you searching for in the right haystack? The finding of a needle itself is tough, but finding the right haystack is also important. How do we do that? Let's understand how we do that in a scientific fashion. It's called crucial evidence, crucial experiment. Many different names are used. I'm just going to use crucial evidence and crucial experiment. This is the definition of experimentus crucis, that is like Francis Bacon, he devised that definition. Something decisive, Marathi madhe nirnayak purava. Okay, बाप दाखव नाही तर श्राद्ध कर, something like this. Or let's take a quick example. I'm going to say something like example, we have the true and a false type of statements. I'm going to use that. You have to tell me what I'm saying is true or false. How many of you know the name Lokmanya Tilak? Everyone knows. Swatantraveer Savarkar, Mahatma Gandhi. Okay, so these three people, and this year is 2025. Now I'm going to make a statement. Listen carefully. About 100 years ago, in 1925, in Pune, or for this purpose, we can make it Thane, it doesn't matter. Okay, in Pune, Mahatma Gandhi, Swatantraveer Savarkar, Lokmanya Tilak, they came together in 1925 and discussed how to acquire a freedom from the British. False. Why do you say that? Right. Tilak was gone. Tilak passed away in 1920, and I said 1925. Just to give you in a simple language, simple example, this is what we call decisive evidence. Tilak was simply not there. So it doesn't matter. Like, but you know what happens in many times in academia? They discuss, well, I'm not so sure with the philosophy of Mahatma Gandhi and philosophy of Swatantraveer Savarkar, if they will even come together in a one room. Well, actually, that's not true. Many times they came together, but that's besides the point. The decisive point here is 1920 versus 1925. Everyone with me? So that's the kind of evidence we are looking for from the pages of Mahabharata, from the pages of Ramayana. So let's look at this. So we can at least say whether what Nilesh is saying may not be true, but you should be able to say the others are definitely false. For example, okay? So anytime I say something after 1920, no matter what else I say, is definitely wrong if I want Lokmanya Tilak in that meeting. Everyone follows? Something like that. So let's look at the evidence. What you see here, those people who are, of course, I presume you are interested in history. But even if you are not interested in history, or even if you are, this slide can change your life. If you look at any piece of evidence in any area, like, we have guests in psychotherapy, but you can go into any different discipline. If somebody is saying something, somebody claims something, somebody says, I have discovered this, I have invented this, whatever the claim is, at a minimum, you should ask the person, can you explain me the 5 things for your discovery? Can you explain me the 5 things for your invention? This is the logic of scientific method. Sir Karl Popper, how many of you have heard the name? Okay, good. No, at 2 people. I was going to bluff otherwise. Okay, Sir Karl Popper, the greatest philosopher, Western philosopher in the modern times, last 100 years. He defines that method of scientific logic as simply this. It's a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory, in the context of background knowledge. So there are 5 elements and we should be able to explain it. Why do we use a scientific method? Because there is some problem, a very tough problem, and we need an answer. Okay, that's why we are using it. So you need a tough problem before you even begin. To solve that problem, you propose a certain solution. Once you propose a solution, which is a hypothesis, we call it hypothesis or prameya, then basically that tells us what kind of evidence you should go and look for. Like Einstein says, it is the theory that decides what can be observed, which is to say, once you say the theory, you have no right to go beyond what the theory allows you to measure or allows you to see. Okay, then you actually take the evidence, you objectively try to test it with whatever modern science and technology, you draw the inference. And while doing this, you take certain things as assumed to be correct. That is your background knowledge. You can question any of it. The point is, you can question only one thing at a time out of the 5. That is the rule of science. Okay, and you can use it everywhere. In fact, I insist that you should use it everywhere. If somebody comes and says, no, but in my discipline, we have a different method. It may appear to be different method. Let me assure you, there is no different method. It is always this 5-step formula. Now, is this only Western in origin? Of course, West, it was very beautifully evolved and developed in the last 400, 500 years, especially after the European Renaissance. But if you go into the many thousand years old, we don't know exactly how long, the Darshana Shastra, Patanjali just simply, whatever you are saying, now see if you can see those words there. Bhagwan Patanjali in the Samadhi Pad, Sutra number 7, he says, Pratyaksha Anumana Agama Pramanani. Do you see that? The bottom 3. Pratyaksha Anumana Agama Pramanani. He's saying the exactly same method. If you ask Nyaya Darshana's sage Gautam, he says Pratyaksha Anumana Upamana Shabda Pramanani. Do you see that? The middle triangle. And you can just go on. Everyone is saying the same method. We are going to use that, and we are going to, so what I use, I said there are 300 observations in Mahabharata, 600 observations in Ramayana, and this is only astronomy. We will talk of non-astronomy also. Like, one of your professor asked me, but do you have any archaeology evidence? I said, yeah, we will talk of archaeology evidence. But before we go there, actually, when you use astronomy, it is also archaeology. Not many people realize that. What is archaeology? Archeo is past, old. Logy is like a study of the past. Any evidence that is available, if you can use it and test it in an objective fashion and you can draw certain inference, it is archaeology. So this is called archaeoastronomy, just for that reason. But we'll look at some others. Okay, let's go into the evidence itself. How many of you have this experience? No, that was my experience when I started with Mahabharata. Wherever you stumble, there lies your treasure. Now, stumbling, every time you did not find a gold spot. I know that, okay, that's not there. But usually that will happen. If you truly land on a tough problem, that will happen. So let me take you back. 1994, I was just completing my master's in chemical engineering at University of Alberta. I did my bachelor's in Mumbai here, Matunga. So I was in Canada and I had like 15 days or so. So I said, nothing to do. Okay, I'm just waiting for my defense of my master's thesis and ready to start my job. So I go into the Indian section of the library in Edmonton, Canada. And so I just saw the whole Bhandarkar. Everyone is familiar with the Bhandarkar critical edition of Mahabharata. So I said, let me see if I know where the Bhagavad Gita is. So I pulled the Bhishma Parva. Did I pull the right Parva? Yes, right? I pulled the Bhishma Parva, but now the answer is chapter number 23. But I did not know that. So I started reading. Guess what? I never went to Bhagavad Gita. The first, second, third chapter, I found something very fascinating that I did not know. This is a scenario just day before the Mahabharata war. And Vyasa, the contemporary of Mahabharata, but also the writer of the book, is telling Dhritarashtra, the blind king, he's saying, look, can you make a last minute effort to see if we can avoid the war? And he gives a long lecture, I'm not going there, how the war is bad and so on. And in that context, he is giving many signs. Now this gets confused, so I want to give the proper Sanskrit word, nimitta. And what is nimitta? The best definition is given by Jnaneshwar in Jnaneshwari, chapter 18, and Shlok, the OV about 112 to 114. You can check that afterwards, okay? Just to avoid the digression, I will not go there. Just a simple example is you have a clock there, and the clock is always running, whether you are in the room or not. Similarly, the whole astronomy is time. In the Indian context and the world context, it's time. But when something important is happening, just like I have to leave for the airport, and I say, oh, I have to leave at 11:25, and I just look at this. Now that Nitya becomes a Nimitta. It tells me 11:35, I better get going. Okay, it's the same thing. To write down that historical event, Vyasadeva is noting down different observations and putting it in a beautiful fashion, and that's what we are going to see. So while I was looking through that Bhishma Parva, this one fascinating evidence came. There are like 30, 40 in those two chapters. Okay, but I'm just going to only go to two or three. That particular reference is now famous as Arundhati Vasishta observation. What Vyasa is saying is just a day before the Mahabharata war, he's saying, I'm seeing different nimittas, different signs, just like a long arm is on 6 and short arm is between 11 and a 12, that kind of thing. He says that Arundhati star, he's talking of a star Arundhati, okay, in the Saptarshi. Everyone has seen the Saptarshi? Okay, Ursa Major, okay, the panhandle, the 4 stars and the tail 3 stars. The middle tail star is the Vasishta, okay, in modern astronomy, Mizar. Next to that is a very small star, Arundhati, modern astronomy, Alcor. And right now, if you see, what you are going to see is at night, if you can see it, Vasishta is ahead, Arundhati is behind. Actually, they are very, very close. But still, if you took a binoculars, telescope, that's what you're going to see. Or if you have a good eyesight. Now, Vyasa, what Vyasa is saying at the time of Mahabharata war is exactly opposite. That was my stumbling. I said, what? या चैषा विश्रुता राजस्त्रैलोक्ये साधु सम्मता Arundhati Tayapesha Vasishta Prushtata Kruta. Arundhati has placed her husband behind on her back. So whichever way you translate, it means Arundhati is walking ahead. Today, it's the other way. It's the Vasishta is walking ahead. Now, how long Vasishta is walking ahead? Just to give you appreciation for this, this is a problem people are trying to solve for 400 years from the time of Raja Chhatrapati, Shivaji Maharaj times. Nilakanta Chaturdhar, again a Maharashtrian individual who was working in Kashi, he created the composite edition. He is trying to solve it. S.B. Dikshit, Lokmanya Tilak, Pava Kane, C.V. Vidya, you name it, Dr. P.V. Vartak, everyone tried to solve it. So fast forward to this, I see this reference. I said, wow, this is interesting. Immediately I ran to one mathematics professor, again from Maharashtra, Mangesh Murdeshwar, right there in Canada. And I said, Kaka, are you familiar with this? And he was pretty old by that time. He just got up from his chair, pulled one book and gave it to me. And he said, whatever you're asking, very likely there is some discussion of it here. That book, many of you who may know the name, Dr. P.V. Vartak, Padmakar Vishnu Vartak. So that was the Swayambhu book that he gave me. And he said, you look at it. Now, I'll fast forward the story. So I started working on it, and I was just a master graduate chemical engineering, feeling good about myself. I said, I have got 15 days, I will solve this. Part of it is true. I did solve it, but it took me 15 years from 1994 to 2009, just fighting with this one verse. Okay, why Arundhati went ahead, did it went ahead, and what was the cause of it, and what was the time period. So finally, in 2009, it happened to be the birthday of my wife, Ashwini, 8 May, Friday, 2009. And so after my work weekend, so I was working on it, and I said, okay, it's not happening, but finally I could solve it. Okay. And I'm going to tell you what is that treasure pot that I landed in. Actually, in astronomy speak, because likes of P.V. Kane had said this is impossible in the very order of nature. Astronomy speak, this cannot happen. And I said, why would Vyasa write something? So this was the Shraddha. This is sort of the reverence, and so why would he write that? If he wants to just entertain us, he can put something else. But why he says Arundhati is on the other side? That was so surprising. Actually, there is a time historically, astronomy speak, that if anyone in the northern hemisphere who could see Saptarshi would have seen Arundhati walk ahead of Vasishta. And it was not one day, not 1 year. Actually, it was a time period, just for simplicity, let's say from 10,000 BC to 5,000 BC. Okay, that anyone from Earth looking at the sky would have seen Arundhati walk ahead of Vasishta. I'm not going to take you into the astronomy complexity. For that, how many of you have a sleeping problem at night? No one? Okay, some of you do. I have a great solution, no side effects. At the bedtime, all you have to do is open your smartphone, go to YouTube, type Nilesh Oak, Arundhati Vasishta. Okay. Start watching. Either by morning, you will get into binge watching, I can assure you. By morning, you are very enlightened, or you have got a good night's sleep. Okay, one of the two will happen. So now, see, we need a samshay. We have to doubt it. Like right now, you're taking on the shraddha, but you should say, is this really true? Let me go and check it. That's very much required. For an Indic Renaissance, that's very much required. You just don't trust because somebody said so. Trust, but verify. Okay, so stumbling. So now what happened? 10 years after me, there was another guy, Siddhartha Chabra, an Indian fellow based in Michigan. He got an inkling. Well, let me see what Nilesh is saying if it is true. He used the latest data, like about 10 years younger or latest data from the Jet Propulsion Lab and whatnot. And he actually verified what I was saying. He said that's true. In fact, the time became even shorter, like from 6,000 years came down to 5,000. Now, now remember that triangle. What is my theory? Astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata are descriptions of Mahabharata times. Everyone follows? Astronomy descriptions of Ramayana are descriptions of Ramayana times. So once I decide it's astronomy description, when I'm reading this text, I should only focus on astronomy, nothing else. Okay, like remember that story of Dronacharya and Arjun, the parrot and the left eye of a parrot, whatever it is, something like this. So that's how they are there. Now, how do I test it? So that's my evidence. I have to find an objective way to test it. It's a mathematics or astronomy simulations, whatever I take. And based on that, I draw the inference. So now help me draw the inference. If it is saying that Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishta, the way Vyasa was saying, is possible only between, say, 10,000 BC and 5,000 BC. What is your inference for the timing of Mahabharata? Anyone? It has to be between these two. Everyone understands. If you don't understand, then we have a bigger problem. Okay, the next exciting part is here. So now the question is, could this be just a coincidence? Because 100,000 shlok, this one shlok is leading me to that. Could be coincidence that is happening. Vyasa might have said it in some way. So I started, I'll go fast through this. So I started looking for, is there another piece of evidence which also points me to something similar? Okay, so is this just a coincidence? The answer is no. I mean, now that we know it. Again, short summary. Everyone knows Bhishma as a character. So he was the military general from Kaurava side for the first 10 days. On the 10th day, he falls down. Does he die right away? No. He is on the Sharashaya until the day of winter solstice, Uttarayan. Mahabharata evidence tells us that actually he was on the bed of arrows for at least 95 days, a minimum of 95 days. And I want to give you another personal experience that you can relate to. Mahabharata tells us that the war began in the lunar month of Margashirsha. Okay, Masana Margashirshoyam, that Margashirsha. Today, that Margashirsha occurs in December. Everyone would have celebrated Gita Jayanti and all that. Now remember, Vyasa has to be on the bed of arrows for 95 days, and Vyasa fell down on the 10th day. So add additional 10 days, that's 105 days. Sorry, what did I say? Vyasa, forgive me. So Bhishma, he fell down on the 10th days, but war began 10 days before. So it's 95 plus 10, so 105 days, approximately 120 days. Where I'm going with that is 3.5 months to 4 months. Because Margashirsha that time has to be away from the day of winter solstice by at least 3.5 months. Do you follow what I'm saying? If you understand this, and then if we just understand Astronomy 101, do you know what this tells us? Something very amazing. This is my Arundhati Vasishta time bracket. If I look at the Bhishma Nirvana evidence, it tells me this can only happen between 7,000 BC and 4,700 BCE. Okay, the rule that I'm using there is that a shift of a lunar month with respect to season happens every 2,000 years. There is a shift of 1 month. Okay, so Hemanta Rutu 2 months and Sharad Rutu 2 months, approximately 4 months. Today Margashirsha is at the end of Hemanta. At the time of Mahabharat war, it was at the beginning of a Sharad. Do you follow? So 2 months of Sharad, 2 months of Hemanta, about 4 months, 3.5, 4 months. I have to go back by 4 months. So 1 month shift is 2,000 years. 4 month shift is about 8,000 years. That's how the calculation is. And precise calculation, you can do that. You can refine it with additional evidence. The bottom line, In fact, what it tells you is that there is a beautiful, very nicely crisp period of about 1500 years where you should search for the year of Mahabharata war. Okay. And now finally, how do you find the exact year of Mahabharata war? Remember, I'm talking about the jigsaw puzzle, crossword puzzle. So far, we are doing exactly the same thing. Now, everyone knows the planets, Sun, Moon, Rahu, Ketu. Everyone knows Rahu and Ketu. Everyone is scared of them, Nothing to be scared, guys, okay? But what else? Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn. If you take these, all that I just discussed, there are close to 50 different descriptions in the Mahabharata text explaining the timing of Mahabharata. And if you put together, so this is what this is. I mean, on this slide, I can go on for 5 days. Monday morning, 8 o'clock until Friday evening, 5 o'clock. But I'm going to do that in 30 seconds. If you solve this in the jigsaw puzzle, you get only 1 year, that is 5561 BCE. Now, some of you must be wondering, like, how does exactly the evidence looks like? Remember, it's a poetry, it's a kavya, arsha kavya. That's how they are. Prajapatyam hi nakshatra grah tikshta mahadyuti shanaishchara pidayati pidayan pranikodikam shanaishchara. Prajapatyam cha nakshatra, it is affecting the nakshatra of Prajapati. Okay. And this is a jigsaw puzzle. So that Saturn is doing something to the nakshatra of Prajapati, but it's also doing Bhagam nakshatra akramya Surya putrena pidate. It is also troubling another nakshatra, Bhaga nakshatra. It's also doing something else. For example, like a last day, it is close with the moon and so on. So remember, we are solving the crossword puzzle. Okay. This is just for Saturn. There is for Jupiter 4 references, 8 references for Mars, 6 references for Venus, 8 references for Mercury, and so on. That's how it gives it. I will quickly go through the Ramayana because essentially the methodology is similar. Okay, the details change. So Ramayana, if you take out of 600 references, only 6 references, okay, it brings you down to 13 millennium BCE. Okay, just because to manage the time, I'm not going to go through the details of this. But out of 600, you take 6 references, and I have enough of my talks for your good night sleep. Okay, at night, you can look at those. 6 references pull you down to between, like, say, 10,000 BC to about 14,000 BC. It cannot be after that. It cannot be before that. That's what the reference will come to you. And then I struggled for about 6 months to actually pinpoint the specific year within that 4,000, 5,000 bracket. And there is a reference in Ramayana, Lakshman is like astronomer. Like just like Vyasadeva is giving the nimitta, in Ramayana it's the Lakshman. When they leave from Kishkinda, again he says what is the astronomy situation in the sky and so on. And that allows us to pinpoint a very specific year, very specific month, specific date and so on. Because the evidence is rich and evidence is very refined evidence. Because sometimes you can have lots of descriptions, but that may not be sufficient. For example, if I say, oh, that person was born on Monday, how useful is that? Not very useful. Okay. If I say that person was born on Akshay Tritiya, it's somewhat more useful, right? Because we can exactly find out Akshay Tritiya, but I want to know which year. If I know which year and Akshay Tritiya, how many of you feel very confidently we can tell within a accuracy of plus minus 1 day? That is the beauty of an Indian lunisolar calendar. Okay, like that. So now what I want to do is change the gear and take you somewhere else in the next 15 minutes or so. Now, what did I do? I looked at the astronomy evidence, empirically, scientifically tested it. Every time I'm drawing an inference, brought it together and found the dates. Now, have you heard the English term saying called no good work goes unpunished? So people immediately say, Nilesh, now that's great. But okay, now do this. Start digging somewhere. Find the chariot of Arjuna or something. Because in our understanding of archaeology, when I say our, I don't mean just India, but India, the problem is really grave. But outside also the world, the problem of archaeology, because see, many times, even in your minds, right now, when you hear the word archaeology, what do you visualize? Suppose I'm an archaeologist, I tell you, right? How do you visualize me? The Indiana Jones guy, right? Yeah, exactly. He just showed, hey, where is your axe? You should be digging, man. What are you doing here? So literally, or the brush and slowly, nicely, like some sort of removing the dust. That is true. That is archaeology. But that is not the only archaeology. That is called dirt archaeology. If you don't have any text, if you don't have any reference to that you can go to, you have no other. So what happened in Europe, for example, this is after Darwin, by the way. Before that, Bible or Herodotus' History of the World, those were the historical texts. After Darwin, suddenly there was this whole new interest because time scale has changed in their mind. So, but there are no texts that go back. Now, the Old Testament does go back. It talks of many years and so on, but still no specific details. So they started digging, and if they find something, they can date it, whichever method you can use. Everyone knows carbon dating is great, guys. It is just one of the many methods, by the way. So you date it, and now you say, okay, who was here? You may not know the answer, you can guess, or you said, I don't know, but somebody was there because there was a pot or there was a pan or somebody cooked the food and so on. So we can use it. We should use it, but we should not discard what the descriptions and the narrations we have. But the point I want to say, this is a scientific issue. It's called tetradic schema of scientific method. When you solve one tough problem, if you are thinking it's a time for party, not so. Actually, when you solve a phenomenal, a tough problem, and you can celebrate that as much as you want, but actually, if you have done some revolutionary work, it leads to many more problems of higher complexity and harder to solve. I mean, you see that in the modern science. Like with the Copernicus, he said sun is at the center. Then Kepler comes, he says the orbits are not circular. Then Newton comes and says if there are inertial bodies, there are attractive force. And then Lagrange comes and Faraday and Maxwell and Einstein, and you know the whole story. And it hasn't stopped, right? It's the same thing. So this is that tetradic schema. P1 is my problem number one. To solve it, I propose a theory. That's a tentative theory. Astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata, descriptions of Mahabharata times. To solve it, what did I do? I did all kinds of permutation, combination, experimentation. Arundhati is ahead of Vasishtha. I have to find the time when Arundhati can be seen ahead of Vasishtha. That's why I have to restrict between 10,000 and 5,000 BC. Because only there I can eliminate the error. Are you with me? Right? So that's error elimination. Now, when that is achieved, it leads to the bigger problem. Is this just a coincidence? So Bhishma Nirvana comes in. Okay, so Bhishma Nirvana gives me 1500 years. But how do you figure out the individual year of the war? So now we found the year. Now what's next? It leads to problems of higher complexity. Let's look at some of them. This is when people will do, and they have done it to me for 15 years, and I'm not the unique case. That happens to anyone who does the original research. They will ask you the next question. Well, if this is so, how come we don't have the evidence for? Right now also, this question would have come into your mind. Okay, and that dot dot dot, you can fill the whatever the blank, whatever the thing you have in mind. How come I don't have this? How come I don't have this? Also, are you saying the language was there 7,500 years ago? Aren't we like monkeys jumping from one tree to another? I mean, all kinds of questions will go into your mind. Okay, you can fill this. Now, just to give an idea, this is how science works. Science is brilliant, amazing. All the technology we are using, the foundation is science for that. But remember, there is an infinite thing that we actually don't know even today. And just like a centrifuge, have you seen the centrifuge in the lab? Like some things come out. It's like few pieces are thrown at us if we do the tapasya. So we know about the atomic model. We know that solar system, sun is at the center. We know the DNA now, DNA sequence and whatnot. We also know the Newton's formula. But these are the few things we know. So therefore, I have a quote from Sir Karl Popper. This is all common about us. Everyone should feel good about ourselves. While differing in the little bits of knowledge that we have, maybe I know a little bit more about Mahabharata than you. When it comes to ultimate ignorance, we are all equal. If we just look at the things we don't know, we are all on the same page. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So basically what Nyaya Darshan says is we can only talk of that evidence that we have. Pramana tashyartha pratipatte. Then it says, the next sutra is very beautiful. It says pramana anupapatti upapattibhyam. The evidence that we don't have, because many people say, but how come we don't get this? And I say, I don't know. You start digging, man. Okay, so the evidence that we don't have, it's not useful to prove something. It's not useful to disprove something. Everyone with me? Very important. So let's look at what evidence we have. From Mahabharata, I'm going to take quickly 2, and from Ramayana, I will take 2. Outside astronomy. So we got the date. How many of you know that Krishna's Dwarka was flooded and destroyed by rising sea waters sometime after the Mahabharata war? Mahabharata says 36 years. So 5561 plus 36 gives you 5525. Everyone understands why the number went down? We are coming towards us. And everyone knows 18 Okshohini, whatever that means. Those many male soldiers fought for 18 days, and practically most of them were gone. Just keep that in mind. We'll look at these two evidence, and then we'll look at quickly two on Ramayana. Oceanography. Now, Krishna's Dwarka getting flooded in the ocean, we are not going to see it in the sky. It has to be searched for the ground, okay? So what evidence we have? Mahabharata explains the modern scientific data. Some addition to Dwarka I'm going to show you. So let's look at the west coast of India. That's where Krishna's Dwarka was. When today you go to Krishna's Dwarka and Krishna Mandir, that is in the memory of a Krishna. That has nothing to do with Krishna's Dwarka. How many of you want to know where exactly is Krishna's Dwarka? Okay. Okay. How many of you, those who raised the hand, how many of you are a good swimmers? Okay. You need to start taking swimming lessons first. Then you go to Somnath. Okay. So Somnath, you look at the west direction straight, and then you slowly turn yourself towards the south, little bit, southwest. Okay. Take a deep breath, jump into the ocean, swim for 10 to 15 kilometers. That's where you're going to find Krishna's Dwarka. This is a consistent work of many folks, including Graham Hancock, Glenn Milne, and everyone else. So on the west coast, this is a 2000-year-old, 20-year-old paper, Zarin's. X-axis is time, Y-axis is the sea level rise. Okay, I know you cannot see the number. I'll tell you the numbers. Do you see the vertical dotted line, the red line? Okay, I have drawn it at 5525 BCE. Against that, I don't know if you can see the curve, the water level curve, sea level curve is coming down and then going up. Right in the middle of 6 millennium BCE, 5525 BCE, there is a sudden sea level rise of 15 meters. 15 meters, that's about 45, 50 feet. If that happens, folks in Thane should be scared. Okay, think of that. So that happened. Not only that, the next 300, 400 years, there was an additional 8-meter rise. How many of you have heard the archaeologist here, Dholavira and Lothal in Gujarat? This graph, although I'm explaining Krishna's Dwarka getting destroyed in 5525 BC, this graph also explains why Dholavira was a port and why Lothal was a port. If you see the horizontal line at the top, like MSL, mean sea level, the net water rise was such that it was above today's level by on an average plus 3 meters on the west coast. That tells you why Dholavira was a port, why Lothal was a port. Afterwards, go to Google and check when Dholavira was a port, Lothal was a port. You will get the number about 5000 BC to 2000 BC or 4000 BC to 2000 BC. That graph explains. There is another line that I have drawn. From 4000 BC, the water level is actually going down. If you see the dotted line arrow that I have drawn afterwards there, towards our time. Because the water is going down, no longer Dholavira is a port, no longer Lothal is a port. Okay, so actually you can solve many problems. But is that just only one data point? The answer is no. You just name a continent and I can tell you a very clear evidence of a sudden sea level rise in the middle of 6th millennium BCE, 5525 BCE. Okay. So there are 30 data points. It was a global event. The Krishna's Dwarka flooding was a global event. I will show you something interesting. If you know this, then I will explain. Otherwise, I will skip the slide. How many of you have heard of Atlantis? Okay. What do you know of Atlantis? Plato writes about it. And what does Plato says? Plato says that this event happened 9,000 years before Plato. Okay. Now, when is the Plato's time? 2,500 years ago. Add to that 9,000, 11,500 years ago. Let me show you. This is a Paul Blanchon's paper. Exactly same university where I did my master's, but in geology. This is Krishna's Dwarka. This data is, thank you. This evidence is from Caribbean, West Indies. It is a global event. You see Krishna's Dwarka. You see that white patch there? That's a sudden sea level rise. You know, there is no coral growth during that time. This is exactly 11,500 years ago, the Plato's Atlantis. Now, we don't know the location, but that's 11,500 years ago, sudden sea level rise. And I will skip this, but Ravana's Lanka. We don't have it in Valmiki Ramayana, but in a social memory in Kerala, in Gujarat, in Dang, there is a memory that Ravana's Lanka was also gone underwater after Ravana's time, after Rama killed Ravana and some time after. Because of time, I will not go there. But just this one graph actually tells you these three great historical events of the last 15,000 years. Okay. So somebody who asked, where is archaeology data? Here is the archaeology data, guys. Okay. Don't ask me where is the pot. You don't always need a pot and a pan. Okay. Now, this is very interesting evidence. I was so shocked, pleasantly surprised, is this. How many of you, before coming today, or in general, you would have heard this? Mahabharata war happened about 5,000 years ago. Yes? Let me tell you something. The entire Mahabharata text, there is not even a single piece of evidence, astronomy or otherwise, that no matter how much jumping you do around, how much dancing and jumping and singing you do, it will not take you anywhere close to 3000 BC plus minus 1000 years. So you have to start asking, whoever come up with that date, how did you figure this out? It's worth asking that question. The reason I mention that is even in oceanography, I found the evidence. This is from Indonesia. Because of time, again, I will not explain the details, but notice there is a record of last 7,500 years of sea level rise and tsunamis. But do you see that period in between that I have marked into the brackets? From 3,500 BC to 1500 BC, which is within that time, you will see 60 plus Mahabharata researchers claiming a year of Mahabharata war, which is around 3000 BC. Astronomy, there is not even a single piece of evidence, but even on the ground, during that time, 3500 to 1500 BC, and you can see that in the west coast, you can see this is in the Indonesia, you can see that on the east coast in Pumpuhar. Actually, during that time, there is no tsunami and there is no sea level rise. If anything is happening, actually the water is going down during that time. Okay. So this is a evidence that definitely there was no Krishna's Dwarka flooding and destroyed during 3000 BC plus minus 2000 years or something like this. Okay. Another evidence from genetics. Let's go fast through this. This is Monica Carmen paper from 2015. Suppose we will use our the founders here with your permission, of course. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Bedekar. Okay. Now suppose they enter the room. Now they are just perfectly on time and they came here, okay, and made sure that we were on time. But there were some latecomers there, in the back. But let us imagine Mr. and Mrs. Bedekar come in. Now, if you are those of you who know them, what will you say? Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Bedekar are here today. That's for us ordinary people like me and you. But if you are a molecular biologist or if you are a geneticist, that's not what you say. Do you know what you say? The molecular biologist, geneticist, he says, interesting. 3 X's and 1 Y enter the room. Everyone knows what I'm talking. Okay, in the female, like a lady, it's a XX, men XY. Just keep that in mind. So right now, if we just take a random variety here, okay, everyone is carrying XY or XX, and you take the variety of it and you do the ratio, I can assure you, look at this line, from 150,000 all the way to say 30,000. If you take an average of that on the Y-axis, what would that be? Somewhere between 3 and 4. You know why? That's exactly what it is. If you see a couple, there are 3 X's, 1 Y. And if you take lots of variety of it, the noise ratio is 3:1. Fast forward to 7,500 years ago from our time. You see that long big peak? This is all global genetic data, available data that Monica Carmen and 93 other genetic researchers used it in 2015. And they said there was a significant male chromosomes bottleneck. Something happened to male chromosomes. As if like a significant portion of male chromosomes variety disappeared from the surface of the earth. Okay. So that's that curve there. So now I'm going to give you a metaphor. Suppose you hear about the earthquake. What do you ask? If you hear about the earthquake, you ask immediately 3 questions. If you are not asking, these are the 3 questions you must ask. Where did it happen? Where is the epicenter? When did it happen? And how serious was the earthquake? Think of the Mahabharata war as a genetic earthquake that happened. 18 Okshoeni, you can calculate that that comes out to 4 million people, 4 million exclusive men. Okay? 4 million, 40 lakhs, they came, fought there 18 days, and 99% were gone. Now the question is, can that have any effect on the posterity in their genetic makeup? That's the question. And Monica Carmen, they don't know anything about Mahabharata, by the way, okay, no, about this. So that's their paper. They're saying there was a significant Y chromosome bottleneck. When? So significant, we will find out 16:1. Everyone says y-axis 16:1. If you do signal to, how many engineers in the room? Okay, you know signal, and you can explain. Okay, those who don't know, just look at those engineers, ask them afterwards if you have a problem. Okay, 16:1 is the absolute one, but signal to noise is 16:3, about 5:1. So that's my Richter scale. What is the intensity of my genetic earthquake? That is that. When did it happen? 7,500 years ago. Do you know something happening 7,500 years ago? Now you do. Possibly Mahabharata. One more question I must answer. Where did it happen? Because if the epicenter is Atlanta, then all bets are off, because we know Mahabharata war did not happen in North America. The same paper, Monica Carmen's paper, actually shows you where it happened. And that's why I ask you to remember the Syria to Indonesia. Okay, bit hard to read, but see if you can do it. Look at the South Asia color, the dark green. Okay, at the this bottom. See if you can follow that color. I have drawn some maps. On this map, this is again a time axis going from say 12,000 BC as a control towards our time. The first one, the Y chromosomes bottleneck, the effect of that, the first one to feel the effect is India in the graph. You see that dark green, South Asia. The longest to stay in that unequilibrium state, okay, is India, and the last one to recover is India. Now the next two candidates who saw at least similar intensive effect and nearby, that is the Near East is Middle East. Okay, you see that color? Watch that. After the green line, that is the next line, and it came back fast. And then the Eastern Asia, east of India, that is the third line that you can see. I don't know if you can see the color well, but the first three lines from this side. Okay, now one more question I'm going to ask on this one. Do you see the yellow line? It's for Europe. What do you see? Something interesting. Um, let me see if I brought my money with me. If somebody gives the answer, I'm going to give you 500 rupees. Okay. So I showed you this green line that is happening something in India. Now the yellow line, what do you see at the first thing? Yellow is about Europe, and you see one more thing about it, that it also shows similar behavior like going down and coming up. What's the difference though? Huh? Yeah, you gave the answer, so you'll get 500 rupees. That's fine. But there is one more difference. It is showing after some time, 2000, 2500 years after it happened in India, Middle East, and this. Who said out of, yeah, please come in here. Your name, please? Virendra Egbote. Okay, can you give him a big hand to Virendra Egbote? Thank you. This is out of India migration. Aryan invasion theory is gone. You can trash it just on this. If you do it on the Mahabharata dating itself, you can trash Aryan invasion theory. In fact, remember I showed you the triangle and the 5 points? Not even a single point can be written about Aryan invasion theory on those 5 points. So actually, I don't use the word Aryan invasion theory. I called it Aryan invasion nonsense. That's what it is. Okay, and that was basically continued. And outsiders are not talking about it. People in Europe are not talking so much. I mean, they just chuckle and laugh at Harvard, like a Michael Witzel. He's saying, yeah, I'm watching the fun. The Indians, in the ocean, salty water going into their nose and ears, and a mouth. Because do you know who is talking about Aryan invasion still? Indians. Okay, that's the point of it. Okay, let's quickly go through the, by the way, it's not only the human beings who have gone out with that Y chromosomes bottleneck. The simple domestic mouse, the Vahana of a Ganesha, the domestic mouse. If you go and look at the genetic study, this is Bonhomie 2007. Okay, it's 2007 paper. If you look at all the domestic varieties of mouse in the domestic mouse in the world, and you try to do they call it coalescence, go backwards in time. Okay, like a cricket, the ball and the go backwards. You try to go backwards to see what happens. You find all the domestic varieties of mouse originally came from India that you find around the world. Now, do you think the domestic mouse decided I want to go to Switzerland for vacation? No. It has gone with the migrations of the agriculture transfer and so on and so forth. And you can say the same thing about the cows and so on and so forth. This is that data. Let me quickly take Ram Ravana, like 2 minutes more. Uh, I'm pulling two instances. Ramayana describes elephant with four tusks. How many of you have read that before? Okay, actually multiple times, 3 or 4 times. Now, those who have gone to the zoo or circus or whatever, you have seen the elephant, I'm confident, or in the pictures with the two tusk, but not the four tusk. Okay, not unless you go into paleontology. So now we are pulling different disciplines of science. Now, and the other one is Ramayana's like a geography, 14,000 years that Anil ji was talking about the Peru evidence from Peru. But let's look at paleontology. So there are many instances. I'm taking one. When Hanuman goes to Lanka, when he sees Ravana's palace, he sees many things, but the important thing here is he sees that the Ravana's palace, besides the security guys, is guarded by elephants with, it says, 2, 3, and 4 tusks in one place. Another place says only 4 tusks, such like that. Now, if you were asking this question 300 years ago, we said, I don't know what to make of it. Maybe embellishment, something like this, fancy, like Indra's Airavata with a 6 tusk or something like this. But now that the research that we know of the mammoths, in the Alaska and Siberia, but actually around the world, just on the back of an elephant, if you see the world map, I don't know if you can see it, and many dots. This is quaternary extinctions. There were creatures like elephant with 4 tusks, and they existed until 9000 BC, until 11,000 years ago, the younger Dryas, and then they went extinct. Now, what is the timing of Ramayana? 14,000 years ago. So this doesn't prove Ramayana happened, but this gives a Purak evidence, a corroborative evidence for the dating of Ramayana. Everyone follows? Or the descriptions of Ramayana. So it's not limited to astronomy, by the way. Quickly, geography one. When Sugriva sends Vanara party in 4 directions, he sent them east, west, north, and south, and tells them how to go. Just like we say, okay, go to Godbandar Road, go all the way to Dosti Imperia, then take a left turn, and so on and so forth, like we give the direction. Sugriva is giving them the direction, how far to go, what are the markers. And out of that, I'm simplifying it for you. You can, again, bedtime, you can just go there, Nilesh Oak, Sugriva's Atlas Part 1, Part 2. Okay, enlightenment or good night sleep, you decide. So he is essentially explaining the world geography all the way from the Andes in South America to Alps in the Europe, in the east-west direction. And in the north from Arctic Sea, he calls it Uttara Payasam Nidhi, and all the way to Antarctica. He calls it Rajdhani of Yama, Yamapuri, or Yamasya Rajdhani. That's how he calls it. Beautiful descriptions. I will not spend time on this, but one thing I want to show you. Now people suddenly, they go backward. Oh, so but were there human beings in South America? Of course there were, we know that. But if you look at the archaeology evidence, it goes back to 30,000 BC in Monteverde in Chile. If you go to Panama, goes back to 50,000 BC, 50,000 years. So that's not a problem. But even this is a 2015 David Reich Harvard paper on genetics. You can actually trace the Indian ancestry going back to South America. These are not jugaad created by me, by the way. You can go to the 2015 David Reich paper to see actually the Andaman Nicobar genes going all the way there. But something else now. So now that you are comfortable with this, that there were people in 14,000 years ago, some of you might have seen this. This is a structure in Peru. On the west coast, you can see from the ocean about 12 miles. When Spaniards came there about 500 years ago, and they asked like, hey, did you create it? To the local Indians, Ayamara Indians, Quechua Indians. They said, no, we didn't do it. It was always there. Do you know why it was created, when it was created? They don't know the answer, says it was always there. What if I tell you, because this is not some random picture I'm pulling from Peru. This is Sugriva explaining to Vanara party going in the east direction. First go to Ropyadweep, then go to Yavadweep, so Thailand, then Indonesia, then go to some additional dweeps like Papua New Guinea and so on, then Polynesia, cross the Kshirosagar, which is Pacific Ocean. And then he says, now you come to Sriman Udaya Parvata. That is the rising mountain, the eastern mountain, which is Andes. You know what he says? This structure is, now look at the structure and look at the Sanskrit words. Now, most of you who understand Marathi or any Indian language, you should be able to figure this out without knowing Sanskrit. Trishira Kanchanas Talastasya Mahatmana Sthapitah Parvatasyagre Virajati Savedika. There cannot be a better description of this structure than what is given in the Ramayana. Sugriva is explaining to the party going in the east direction. What is not given, I have not given the shlok, but the next shlok explains who created it, when it was created, why it was created. Purvasya Adishi Nirmanam, just like we have an international day line going through the Pacific. Now this is on the ground. Purvasya Dishi Nirmanam. This is the end of eastern direction. Okay. Krutam Tat Tri Dasheshware. Indra is the Swami of eastern direction. They say Indra created this. Okay. And then it says Tatah Para Hemamaya. If you go beyond this, this is on the ocean front. Tatah Para Hemamaya Sriman Udaya Parvata. If you go beyond that, you will see the Himachadit. Okay. With the snow capped mountain, Udaya Parvata. Andes, it's calling Udaya Parvata. Again, my time is up, but I'm going to tell you something else. This insignia, like we say Satyameva Jayate or India's Tiranga is a representation of India. Similarly, Sugriva says this is an insignia for the Ananta mountain, it says. Ananta, Udaya Parvata behind it. Now, that's where Ramayana stops. But if you go to Bhagavad Puran, there is a whole description of glories of Ananta Deva. Now, we know Ananta as a Shesha, blah, 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 that's fine. But there, the Ananta is described as the mountain in Patal. Now, for 1 second, if you can stand, Anilji. Okay, I don't know if you have heard about Anilji Patil. He has written a book, Patal Yatra. Okay, so that's the Patal. You can ask any questions about South America to him. Okay, but therefore I'm saying in the Bhagavad Puran there is a specific mention of this Ananta mountain in Patal. Now Patal is South America, but something more. What if I tell you, and you can do this afterwards, go to Google and just type Ananta in Andes. Okay, Mount Ananta in Andes, and you know how many you are going to find? 4 or 5. Monte Ananta, Ponte Ananta, Cerro Ananta in the Andes. Now, if you try to see, well, was some person like our esteemed guest here, somebody who is interested in, say, Indian philosophy or something, maybe he read Ramayana here, then happened to go to Peru or Andes and said, well, let me call this Monte Ananta, let me call this Cerro Ananta. That can happen. That has happened in the what is that? Grand Canyon, some of the Hindu names are there. That happened recently, guys. Some of the social media stuff you will see, oh, that is going millions of years ago. That's all nonsense. Or Australia is also nonsense. Don't fall for it. The Australis is like a south. It means south direction. But just because Australia sounds good, so feels good. Okay? All right. Stay away from such drugs. Okay. So actually that's the one evidence. Because of time, I'm going to stop here. What I showed you just right now is like possibly out of 20 different areas, I just gave you a glimpse of 4 additional pieces of evidence beyond astronomy for Ramayana and Mahabharata. But everything that is listed, there is actually evidence, and I have discussed it in my lectures and books and whatnot. So on that, I will stop. Those of you, if you try my YouTube videos and they don't work for sleeping, you can read my books. They work equally well. So if you are in India, you can get those from Subbu Publications. They are also been translated. By the way, these 2 books in Marathi, Mahabharat Yuddhakal Aitihasik Ram, right here, published in Thane by Param Mitra Prakashan. Okay. Yeah, and you can get this on Book Ganga and Amazon and so on. There are also anyone who reads Kannada here in the audience? No? Okay. So cannot read. Okay, it says, when did Mahabharat war happen in Kannada? Okay, so that's also been translated, many others, and there is something else if you are interested. Thank you so much. My apologies for going over time. Namaskar. You want to say something? No? Yeah, let's go into question answer. Let's take few. Yeah, please be specific. Ask the question. Don't give a preamble. I know the background. Yeah.
Since less number of questions are allowed, I have one. So you said Rigveda is at least 21,000 years old. So the culture reflected in the Rigveda is of Chalcolithic period. And when we say 21,000 years old, we are still in the late Paleolithic or in some places Mesolithic period. So basically Stone Age. So the culture reflected in the Rigveda is not matching with the archaeological data. So how are we going to bridge the gap between these two?
Actually, you'll be amazed because see, remember, Rigveda is not from one period. Okay. If I have time, I will go into that. I'll take one point. But if you read Rigveda, actually the culture described in Rigveda matches the Stone Age that he's talking about. This may be a surprise to many. But that's not to say only Stone Age there in Rigveda, because Rigveda is written over a very long time. If you read Mahabharata, you know that Vyasa recasted, re-edited Vedas. Okay, that is a description. In fact, the entire history of river Saraswati, which no longer exists, is there in Rigveda. Rigveda talks of Naditame, Ambitame, Devitame, Saraswati, the grandest of the grand river, Giribhya Samudra, from high mountains all the way to the ocean. And that powerful river, just like we cut the lotus stem and lotuses float on the water, the current is so strong that the top of the mountains also float on this river. That's the kind of powerful river. The change of it, this is my whole another talk, but the change of it happening when Yamuna separated from Saraswati, went to Ganga about 50,000 years ago. Fast forward to 15,000 years ago, Satluj, which is the grandest river, separated from Saraswati, started flowing westward, which is described in the Ramayana, by the way. So because of that, and then how many of you know the Nadi Sukta in Rigveda? 10.75. Go back and read the Nadi Sukta now in the context of this information. The Nadi Sukta talks about all 19 rivers, including Saraswati, but something more. Saraswati, which is considered otherwise the grandest river, Naditame, Ambitame, in the Nadi Sukta, Saraswati is no longer the grand river. You will find the two Ruchas there, which praises Sindhu and says, Sindhu, you are the grandest river. And why Sindhu has become the grandest river? Because Satluj turned westward went to meet Sindhu. So this whole hydrodynamics is called morphodynamics of rivers or hydrology in general. That is also captured in Rigveda. Do you know how old is Saraswati? Simple answer is we don't know. But we know that it is definitely as old as 200,000 years. This is James Blinkhorn 2020 paper near Bikaner. You know, that's where they found out. So it actually matches. If you listen to my co-researcher Rupa Bhati, and she was also on the Ranveer. How many of you watch Ranveer guy, Ranveer Allahabadiya? Okay, that's a good night exercise there. I have like a 3 of them. Okay, they are gone totally like what? I forgot the numbers now. 2 crore. I have to translate from English to American to Indian system. About 2 crore. But Rupa Bhati also like a 3 million, like a 30 something. Do watch that. Okay. So that's the answer. Huh. Huh. Hmm. Okay. According to me, I will tell you later. I will tell you according to Vyasa and the text of Mahabharata. Okay. It happened between the Satluj on one side, it says Saraswati, and Drushadwati on the other side. If you want to go and find out, right now what you have to do is go to Delhi, get into the car, start driving north towards Kurukshetra or Thanesar. Once you go to Thanesar, basically draw a right Thanesar as a center, draw a diameter that is about like a 40 kilometers or so. Draw a circle. That is where Kurukshetra war happened.
Sir, there is.
Sorry, who is talking? No, 1 minute. Wait for a microphone. Okay.
Okay, as per
Madhvacharya.
Madhvacharya, it is said that Shruti, Smruti, Puran, Adi, Pancharakriti Kiti Vina, it is Utpayata. So it is like we base our history literal evidences. So in our this, why don't we take consideration Rama and Mahabharata as per Manvantari Itihas, like which happened in the past? Why we don't take? in consideration.
Why we don't take into consideration what?
Manvantar Ityas, that is Kalparambha and Manu epochs and all that.
Yeah.
That is my question.
Right, now we take it into account. I'll explain you. So for example, the shlok he was quoting, okay, Panchatantra Visharshaka Ekantiki Harir Bhakti, okay, Utpata Eva Kalpate, okay. Now this is more for a bhakti, by the way. Okay, if you just do this without the foundation, that happens. But something similar Krishna says in the Uddhav Gita in Bhagavad Puran for tapasya, for research. Do you know what it says? He says, now modern science talks of triangulation. Krishna is talking of quadrangulation. Shruti pratyaksham aitiyam anumanam chatushtayam. Quadrangulation. Pramanesha anavasthanad vikalpat sa virajyate. If your knowledge is not based on the foundation of Shruti, Pratyaksha, Anuman and Aitiya, Ityasa, then your knowledge is never stable. Actually, we are taking every single piece of evidence. If it exists, we are taking it. Okay, but so your question was, why are we not taking Kalpa? No, we are taking it. But we have to understand what is a Kalpa. We have to understand what is a Manvantar. We have to understand what is a Kali Yuga. Like how many, if I ask you, what is the duration of Kali Yuga? I know you will pass with the flying colors. Everyone will say, what, just randomly. Who wants to give the answer? How long is the Kali Yuga? Yeah, 4,32,000. Now, what if I tell you that is true? That is a correct answer. But that is a yuga only in astronomy. It has absolutely, positively, decisively nothing, nada to do with the history. How many of you know that? It is a, do you know where you get this 4,32,000? Only in Surya Siddhanta, only in Aryabhatiya, only in the Bhaskara. These are yugas not to be used somewhere else. It's like, in India, we think, by the way, the Indians they think like that, right? I mean, in America, somebody says, oh, it cost me $500. They say, yeah, it's not that. In America, our $500 is like 500 rupees. The people who know, they know that that is not true. Something similar happened. Yuga is a broad concept. Arun Upadhyay, he's a retired IPS officer in Odisha. He has collected 26 different definitions of yuga. I said that's not enough. So I have searched and added 10 more definitions of yuga from our text. We are just pulling one randomly, like saying a 500 rupees note is same as 500 US dollars. It's not so. So that is there. Kalpa we should take into consideration, but we should qualify which kalpa we are taking into consideration. That's important. Next.
So really great to see you in person and listen to the talk. I get the point that the dark archaeology is not the only thing, but the skeptical mind asks, if we go back and can find remains of dinosaurs, is it possible that we are not looking at the right haystack, correct haystack? And is it possible to find something if we really find the correct haystack?
Yeah. Thank you. Everyone understood the question? So if we can find 65 million years ago back evidence of dinosaurs, how come, the question is, he did not said that same thing. How come we don't find evidence of Mahabharata and Ramayana? Fair? Right? I'm saying actually that's not true. We are finding it. See, for example, what I showed you last 1 hour is basically a evidence that can be objectively tested, much more objectively than the evidence of a tooth of dinosaur, much more objectively, okay, then we can do. But what he's asking is actually a bit further, which I said, if this is so, how come we don't find the evidence of ... and a question mark? So now everyone has a favorite: horse, elephant, tooth of Bhima, a tail of Maruti. This is our problem. Problem meaning this is a problem because we don't understand the logic. We don't understand the modern science, how it works. We don't understand what Nyaya Darshana is teaching us. Nyaya Darshana teaches us how to think properly. We are not thinking properly. That's why it says pramana tashyartha pratipatte. Think of the evidence that you have. If you focus on the evidence that you don't have, nothing wrong with it. But the bottom line is, take an axe and start digging. You can only talk of the evidence that you have. This is not like a hiding under a desk. I will tell you, currently, whatever evidence is available around the world, if that evidence is brought forward, and I have looked for it, that's what I do day and night. And if that evidence does go back to the timelines we are talking, such as Ramayana, Mahabharata, and Rigveda, because he also talked about the Mesolithic and so on. I don't have a time to answer Mesolithic. I will answer that if we get time. So you can, if you can go back to that timeline, I will tell you in last 30 years, I have not found even a single piece of evidence which can be objectively, scientifically, empirically tested, and that contradicts with the timing of Mahabharata or Ramayana or Rigveda. I have not found even a single piece of evidence. If you come across anything, please bring it forward. It has to be objectively testable, empirically testable. Not like, but some guy, like just like Madhvacharya says that. Madhvacharya says many interesting things. If I had a time, I will tell you the whole biography of Krishna. Independently from references from Bhagavad Puran, Harivansha and Mahabharata, I put together the whole biography of Krishna, born in 5633 BC and Krishna Nirvana in 5525 BC. I had not read Madhvacharya. I have still not read Madhvacharya. When I did that, do you know what that timing is? 5633 BCE minus 5525 BCE. That is 107, 108 years. Then somebody from Australia, originally from India, one Mr. Shastri, he wrote to me, originally from Karnataka. He says, Nileshji, you came up with this. Do you know that in Madhvacharya's Mahabharat Tatparya Nirnay, he writes that Krishna lived for 107 years. Saptamabdam Shatottaram. So this is what I call by, Shruti Pratyaksham Aitiyam Anumanam Chatushtayam, a quadrangulation. So yes, we actually do it. Did I
Sir,
answer your question, sir? Did I answer your question? No, you are not doubting. But my point is, so that how come we don't find ... You can fill in anything you want. No, not necessarily. No. So let me answer that part. Thank you. Thank you. Let me answer the second part. What is important is when we go to the museum, any good museum, we see lots of historical objects. And that gives us a very false impression that, wow, so many objects. In fact, usually the feeling is we get so exhausted and tired looking at the pots and pans. We say, where is the sandwich shop? Can I have my coffee break? Something like this. That happens with the paintings also. You go to like Florence, Italy, and after some time, it's like, okay, what is it? The Madonna with the child by this. And he says, okay, I have seen Americans like going through that torturous experience, In Spain, I was there, the Prado, the museum. And there is one section, they call it the attractive marketing, is like, this is Pablo Picasso's some collection. So I went there. I mean, I will go on the business and I would just sit there. So I had the same problem. I said, where is the Pablo Picasso collection? So they said, here is the one. And I sat there watching the fun. So everyone was coming because Pablo Picasso is the thing there, So they're coming and just really tired looking at these weird pictures. They come to the end and they say, excuse me, where is the Pablo Picasso collection? They said, you just walk through it. Okay. So my point is, you go through the museum, you look at this, we have this false impression that so much, I mean, everything that happened in the past is preserved. The reality is very different. Actually, what we see in the museum or what we see in the archaeology excavations and what we find is actually 0.0000001% of everything that happened. So what gets preserved is a very actually coincidental, lucky process. What gets preserved. That's why we don't find it. But to your point, if we dig, we may find it. But there is no assurance. There is no assurance. Yeah.
Sir, I know you're a bit busy, so shall we take 3 more questions?
Sure. But the timing is not a problem for me. But we have to
We
maintain.
would love to.
Yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Sir, thank you for the wonderful insights on your amazing research. Sir, so assuming that all this evidence is true and as you say, the Mahabharata and Ramayana wars actually happened at that particular period in time, there are two possibilities, like because of all this corroborative evidence. One, that somebody who was actually present at that time saw all these features around and wrote about things as they actually happened. Or the second possibility, or one more possibility, is that the person wrote about all these features, or consciously implanted all these true features, real features in those stories of fictional characters that are, that he created. So, because many of the biological things that are described in these epics may not sound
true or accurate today. So what I just wanted to hear your views on this.
Okay, so let me rephrase the question. Everyone heard him, what he said. So one possibility is this is how exactly it happened, and that's why they entered the local descriptions of that time. That's how it comes to us. And in a backward detective fashion, we go back and find out. The second possibility is just like a science fiction is written or something. Let's say someone is having a astronomy software, someone is having the geological data, Paul Blanchon's paper and Mouse Bonhamy paper. He says, let me write an interesting novel like a Dan Brown, something Da Vinci Code kind of thing. So the person is now writing a fictional characters and entering this information, okay, and making it a very beautifully sound Arundhati, Taya, Pesha, Vasishta, Prashtata, Kruta, Dhruvam, Prajulitam, Goram, Apasavya, Pravartate, Chitra. So this person is using the descriptions. The first one is what we are accepting right now. Let us accept the second one. But what does that tell you? So for a minute, let's assume that these both books are fictional books. The story is fictional, only for a minute. Huh? After that, you have to get back, but only for a minute. But it definitely tells you the all kinds of evidence that we find, which is only that we have become familiar, let's say in the last 400 years. But we all know that the Mahabharata 400 is like a stretching the limit, actually last 100 years or so. Okay, or if you want to know Arundhati, only last 15 years. You understand what I'm following? Same thing with the Bhishma Nirvana and so on. So somebody who did this and went backwards, now who is that somebody? That we call Vyasa, let's say. We don't know who Vyasa was in your second scenario. But everyone agrees that Mahabharata is with us at least 2000 years, just for simplicity. Same thing with the Ramayana and so on. So then you have to give this. You read my book, When Did the Mahabharata War Happen? It ends on what you just said. Okay? Those people who want to know what I have said, you can start reading backwards. Okay, this is how it ends. He says, what if my David Rich is my friend from Florida. He said, just for a hypothetical case, just imagine this is just a fictional novel with somebody who has this evidence and just inserted that backwards. I said, then at least you have to accept that all the developed astronomy science that only we can boast in the last 50 years with the astronomy software, okay, the Monica Carmin paper which only came out in 2015, there was a Monica Carmin one before, more than 2000 years ago, who had done this genetic study and had this data or this trident and everything to put it together. Now, you know the Occam's razor, have you heard that? The simplest explanation is the most likely the truthful explanation. So we have two scenarios, a fiction and a reality. Which one is easier to comprehend, easier to accept, easier to understand? You don't have to give the answer. You can answer yourself. That is the answer to your question. Thank you.
ओके सर, एक एक महत्वाचा प्रश्न विचारायचा आहे. आय हॅव सीन ऑल युअर पॉडकास्ट अँड ऑल ऑल्सो कम्प्लिटली. त्याच्यावरती पण मी बराचसा स्टडी असा केलेला आहे. तुमचा असं रात्रीच्या वेळेस थांबून थांबून एव्हरीथिंग प्रॉपरली लिसनिंग टू ऑल द स्टफ. माझ्या घरी आणि माझ्या आजोबांच्या कृपेमुळे मला आय हॅव गॉट दोज 40 books actually, 4 Vedas, 18
Get to the question.
Upanishads.
Just to save time.
हाँ हो सर. 4 वेदास, 4 पुराणास, आपलं 18 पुराणास आणि 18 उपनिषद्स, अँड देन कम्स रामायण अँड महाभारत. माझा एक सिंपल एकच क्वेश्चन आहे की एन्शियंट टेक्स्ट व्हॉट एव्हिडन्स लाईक, म्हणजे एन्शियंट टेक्स्ट मध्ये व्हॉट बुक शुड वी ऍक्च्युअली टेक इट ॲज ऑफ धिस ऑथर अँड ऑफ धिस पर्टिक्युलर व्हर्जन ऑर धिस पर्टिक्युलर एडिशन. मग ते कोणाचं आपण एक्झॅक्टली घ्यायचं ते ऍक्च्युअली.
Okay.
To read off.
Yeah. I'm going to use your questioning as an example, not personally to you, but just guys, this is something to remember. If you have to ask a question, you don't need to give all this background. Okay, what was the question? So if I have to read Mahabharata or Ramayana or Rigveda, which book I should refer to? That is the question. Fair? Okay, that's how you can ask the question. I will say take Bhagavad Gita as an example, and that applies to everything else, because I get this question all the time. There is no question, guys, that you have asked so far or you will ask in the next 10 minutes. There is not even a single question that I have not heard before and I have not answered before. Everything is a frequently asked question. So somebody asked that, the question goes like this: Nilesh ji, I'm inspired. I want to study Ramayana. Can you tell me the most authentic translation? And the simple answer is get lost. You don't know even what question to ask. Because the person when he's asking authentic, it's like somebody has done the job for you. If somebody has done the job for you, what are you there for? Okay, so it's in a different way. So suppose somebody asks the question, which Bhagavad Gita? People ask me, Nilesh, I want to do research like you. Where should I start? I say, start with Bhagavad Gita. And their eyebrows go like, what Bhagavad Gita has to do with this? Bhagavad Gita has to do with everything. No matter what you do. You will see, for example, Bhagavad Gita's Vibhuti Yoga. If you just understand Vibhuti Yoga, it will take you to 5561 BCE. आदित्यानाम अहम विष्णु मासानाम मार्गशीर्षो यम ऋतूनाम कुसुमाकर नक्षत्राणाम अहम शशि. If you just go all of this, you go to Bhagavad Purana also, it will take you to 5561 BC. You take Madhvacharya's Mahabharata Tatparya Nirnaya, it will also take you to 5561 BC. I can promise you that. Okay. So Bhagavad Gita, the answer for just that. So people ask me, which Bhagavad Gita? I say, which Bhagavad Gita do you have? He said, no, I don't have any. Do you know any bookstore? Go to a bookstore, find, hey, do you have a Bhagavad Gita? They say, we have 15. Suppose they put it forward. You say, close your eyes, pick one. Start there. Damn it, start somewhere. Now, this is the next important piece of advice. Once you start reading a certain translation, do not stop. When you do it, anytime you feel like this, I don't think Krishna will say something like this. Put an asterisk around that shlok. I don't think. Maybe there's a problem with translation. When that is done, pick another, go to the same bookstore, close your eyes, pick another one, make sure it's not the same, and start reading the translation. By the time you read 5, 6 of them, you will have a very decent idea what Bhagavad Gita is trying to do. Same thing for Mahabharata, same thing for Ramayana. Start somewhere. Okay.
तर त्याचा काही मेल क्रोमोझोम मध्ये डिप सापडलाय किंवा सापडेल का?
See, I come prepared. See, our problem is we don't know the exact timing of Parshuram, and the available evidence kind of doesn't help us figure out. Okay, but if we can speculate, look at just like this 7,500 peak. Do you see another peak there around 56,000? Very similar. Now, yeah, you see that small peak. Now, small peak is for a different reason, because as you go back in time, the sampling, the mutation and all of that, but it is significant, statistically significant one. Now, the question is, we don't have additional evidence to close the gap, the triangulation, and say, is this due to Parshurama killing 21 times, or is it due to the Dasharatnya Yuddha described in Rigveda that went for 10 generations or something? So it's a speculative. One more thing I will tell you, just because now he opened the can of worms there. Okay. Do you see, come back to 72,000 BC, and do you see it's going in the other direction? Okay, maybe we can stop on that if the time is a restriction. This is, guys, should you give you goosebumps. Okay. Do you see what is happening? It's exactly the other way. Now, this is a female mitochondrial chromosomes bottleneck. Do you see? Exactly opposite of the male bottleneck. Does anyone know something dramatic, significant happening 70,000 years ago? Yeah, the Toba explosion. Okay, in Sumatra Island, now you can go and see the Toba Lake, the huge eruption, the biggest eruption of last 100,000 years. The whole ash and fire and everything came, and usually came on the side of India, the broader India, and you can see everywhere in the sea, ocean, land, you can see the ash layer, and you can date it to 70,000. It seems, we don't have evidence based on this, that the many women died in comparison to men. And now notice something, the woman signal to noise ratio as such is 3, like X, not woman, X chromosomes, mitochondrial DNA, X chromosomes. Now to see an effect in X chromosomes variety dying down, it has to be truly significant. Do you understand? Because the variety there as such is a 3 and it has to go down. So actually it was a massive X chromosomes bottleneck that happened during that. Now why it happened? Guys, take that as a research subject for your PhD. Don't just say archaeological digs in Tamil Nadu. No, that's not interesting. Find out why the woman significantly got affected during the Toba explosion. That is a very interesting subject. If time is a thing, we will stop here.
No, we would like to hear
Okay,
more from you.
fine, fine.
No. Just raise your hands. I'll pass on the mic. I already have few people in the queue. We have a Navy veteran, so I would
Yeah,
like
so
to.
please ensure those who raise the hand, they get the priority also,
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Sir,
Please.
my question is, now by knowing the exact dates and the period of when did Ramayana and Mahabharata happen, so this helps uh, a certain people who are curious and who are going to do more research in that. But how is it going to help a common man
Yeah.
like me?
Good question. Good question. So the point is, hey, this is great. Mahabharata 7,500, Ramayana 14,000. What the hell we do with this? That is actually the question. Okay. Now that's my another lecture, by the way. But my question to back to you: why is it important? You think maybe a couple of people can answer as they understand it. Why is this important? I mean, I can go on for 10 days talking why it's important. How many of you think it is important? Let's start with the simple questions. Okay. How many of you think this is a waste of time? And I mean, maybe curiosity as a good thing, but so what? So bloody what? For example, how many of you think that? So you should raise the hand, please, because you asked the question, although you don't mean it. At least there should be one, right? Of course. Yeah, I know. But why does it matter? Because Deshakala Patra, time, place, contextual. See, you want to understand something, you have to understand the consequences. For example, do you know the Saraswati research? The maximum Saraswati river research is done by non-Indians. Okay, I can just take that and tell you 1985 Mary Corti, France, 1992 Henry Frankfurt, okay, Peter Cliff 2012. I can just go on and give just names. James Blinkhorn, I told you 2020. Michael Petraglia from Australia does research on India. Why are these people interested in India? They're not interested in India per se. Because there happens to be a data both in the literary text as well as in the archaeology text and rivers, especially loss of river Saraswati. This is a big concern to see what causes the decline and disappearance of a river. And will that happen to Amazon? Will that happen to Mississippi? Those are the concerns. That's why they study. Similarly, you look at the genetic ones. What can that tell you? That suddenly, in fact, the entire greater India, like right from Iran, wherever Iraq, and Myanmar and Tibet and everything was covered under a thick layer of ash. But what does it tell you? How many of you been to Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh? Like Ravi Kottisar, archaeologist, he has done a wonderful research there. So you see a red soil there. I have pictures somewhere. Then an ash layer and again the soil. What is interesting is you see the stone tools below the ash layer. You see the stone tools above the ash layer. Okay, so actually the many ladies are gone and men are having a party time. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so yes, there were existence of people before the Toba explosion. There were existence of people after Toba explosion. So in spite of such a natural or man-made calamities, we survive. That is a kind of a message to us. This kind of data is used for diseases. I mean, I can go on and on. That's why I said 10 days. But there is enough of reasons why we need to study this. That's why people are studying. That's why people are studying River Saraswati. Those people who are outside India and nothing to do with River Saraswati. And we can learn a lot from that. Yeah.
Sir, so sites with volcanic ashes have been found in Maharashtra as well. We
Yes.
have in Murgaon, then Bori in Junner area.
Everywhere.
My question is,
Hmm.
there is one inscription of Pulkeshin II from Aihole, and
Yeah.
in which they have mentioned that this inscription is engraved around 3,700 years after the Bharata war. So it doesn't match with the hypothesis you are putting forward.
Huh.
So how will you speak on that?
Okay. So just everyone knows what he's talking about. In Karnataka, just a border with Maharashtra, just south of that, there is a inscription called Aihole inscription. Aihole. How many of you have heard about this? How many of you have seen it? Okay, I will also raise my hand. I have seen it. I mean, we made even video film there. So his question is that evidence does not match with my hypothesis. Okay, I want to just correct him a little bit. I said that particular claim does not match with fact. Okay, and why is that? Actually, many people just use that number 3,725, 36, whatever, and just jump and say, hey, this is a Mahabharat war and therefore it happened 3,000. In fact, there are 60 different researchers who come up with 60 different years around that 3000 BC. Everyone uses Ayodhya inscription to say, hey, this Ayodhya inscription shows this. How come it shows their exact year? Actually, it doesn't, number one. Second, that inscription is written by that's not my expertise, so I'm just telling from a memory. So forgive me if I don't tell all the details correctly. It is written by a poet called Ravi Kirti, who is a Jain poet. Okay. And that Pulakeshi, or whatever the name you said, that is written, it's at the Jain temple. How many of you knew that? It is at the Jain temple. And this is not the only inscription. There is stuff written before, stuff written after, where there is a praise to Bhagwan Jinendra, which is Vardhaman Mahavir, and so on. And then in that context, a reference comes, say, hey, here I am writing this particular Shila Lake, we can say, like written there. 3700, whatever that number is, after some event. Do you know what that event is? The word uses Bharata Daha Vahina. Okay, something fight, something like this. Only the people who are just meditating on Mahabharat, Bharat, they just took the word Bharata Daha and took that to mean Bharata Yuddha. But if you know the Jain history or Jain narrations, you know that there were two brothers, Bahubali and Bharata. They were brothers, they fought for the kingdom. Bharata won, Bahubali lost. And so Ravi Kirti is writing, saying that from the time the war happened between Bahubali and Bharata, okay, 3755 years have passed by when I'm writing this. But we say Bharat, we just jump. I'll give you a couple of, just on that count, I'll take few other notions. How many of you have heard that Aryabhata uh, was 23 years old when Kali Yuga had began 3600 years ago? How many of you have heard that? Something like this. Okay. How many of you have read the original Aryabhata? That's the problem. In the entire Aryabhata, there is no word Kali. You see? So remember, go back there. The 5-point formula, the bottom is background knowledge. If you are premise 1, premise 2, premise 3, premise 4, and then you draw the conclusion, you bring it together. If any one of your premise is wrong, your conclusion is going to be wrong. Aryabhata does not use the word Kali. In fact, his yugas are very different. They are not the yugas of 432,000. He takes 4.32 million, divides by 4. Instead of Surya Siddhanta, which does 1:2:3:4. Are you following what I'm saying? So he's saying from the Yuga beginning, when 36-year hundreds have gone by, I was 23 years old. You follow? Somebody says Yuga, of course. What else it can be? It has to be Kali Yuga. This is one wrong premise. And then once you start with the wrong premise, now when did the Kali Yuga begin? Can anyone tell me the timing of Kali Yuga began that you know? I will help you.
3100 BC something.
O2 BC. Now tell me, Kali Yuga is a very old concept in our case. Why the date is 3102 BCE? Think about it. Go to the root of it to find out who defined that year as the year of Kali Yuga. It will surprise you. I'll just leave it at that. So that's the answer to the question.
Since we have short time period, we will take last two questions. One is from Professor Shinde sir, and another one is from Anevdekar sir.
Okay.
I apologize for other people. They are raising their hands, but we don't have that much time.
Right. And
So
all the questions that you have that I don't know, I have answered them in my talks, books, and blogs. Okay.
Thank you, Ankur. Sir, you have given the timeline of Ramayana and Mahabharata in a very nice way. My question is slightly related to the question asked by gentleman over there. There are various versions of Ramayana. I read in one of the articles that there is one version of Ramayana where Sita Mata is considered as the daughter of Ravana. And in one version, Ravana is considered as the real hero of the Ramayana. So I think as a history teacher, there is a question of authenticity. And that gentleman's question was also related to that. So in that context, I am asking you this question, which edition should be considered as authentic for the historical study?
Okay. So actually answer is very simple to this question. Suppose you have to look for some Mahabharata evidence of arrows and bones and horses. Where would you start digging? Somewhere north of Delhi. Same thing. If you're looking at Ramayana from a historical perspective, there is only one text. Now that may have many versions. That is Valmiki Ramayana. If you're saying, but I like Ramacharita be my guest, don't jump into history. As simple as that. Because, this is written from a certain perspective. If you look at the Rigveda, for example, the emphasis, pradhanya, we call pradhanta, it's a dhyana pradhan. Okay, if you look at Ramayana, it's a history, but it's a niti pradhan. If you look at Mahabharata, it's a karma pradhan. Upanishad is a jnana pradhan. Bhagavad Puran is a bhakti pradhan. We have to understand that. So Tulsi Ramayana is a bhakti pradhan. So if you're looking at history, Valmiki Ramayana. Now you may ask the question, which version of Valmiki Ramayana? Go to Baroda Critical Edition. If you're saying which version of Mahabharata, actually I will tell you, take any version of Mahabharata, meaning the authentic ones, any one of the 50, and still you will get 5561 BC. You take critical edition, you take Nilakanta Chaturdhara's composite edition, Gita Press edition, Kumbhakonam edition, doesn't matter. It will take you to 5561 BC. With all the things. See, in practical life, we don't have a problem. Only when we get into academia and archaeology, we suddenly start thinking idiotically. I'm using the word. When you go to the shop and buy a rice, okay, you bring the rice at home. I don't know what happens these days, but when I was growing up here, we had to clean the rice and remove the stones or something. How many of you, do you have to do that today or no? No more. Okay, somebody does it. But how many of you even before, like somebody, you find the stones, you say, what happened? You just take it back, go to the grocer, Wani, and say, hey, you sold me stones. How many of you have done that? No, unless it's the other way. So there are going to be some evidence that will not match because of translation error, transcription error, transposition error, pathabhed, all of this is there, interpolations. These texts have all of this. In fact, that makes our case stronger. In spite of that, we cook a clean rice and no stone comes under the teeth. We have achieved a feat. Okay, thank you.
Namaskar.
Yeah.
All the time we were talking about Mahabharata Ramayana. 2-3 times you mentioned about Saraswati River. Since childhood, all I have been learning the Saraswati has been vanished, cursed by Vedavyasa when he was telling Mahabharata to Sri Ganesha. I visited Mana village. Mana village, the first village of Bharat.
I will stop you there. You can still ask the question. The Mana in the Uttaranchal. That Mana Saraswati has nothing to do with the Rigvedas or Mahabharatas or Ramayana Saraswati.
And the people always say that Saraswati did exist there. And when we go to Mahakumbha, then again in Triveni Sangam there is going to be Saraswati. So whether Saraswati really vanished or Saraswati still exists?
Okay. Okay, Saraswati, great question. So did Saraswati vanish or Saraswati exist? Because it is there in the Mana in Uttaranchal. It is there in Gujarat also, by the way. And come to Konkan, where I am from. We also have a Saraswati there, in the Konkan belt also. So what happens is, comes after the memory. If you, now we have a guest from America. Like, have you heard of a city called New York? Is after the Yorkshire and York, right? So people take the memories like this. So when suddenly Saraswati disappeared, everyone wanted to see the Saraswati or memory of Saraswati somewhere. Okay, so if you listen to the Acharya's commentaries, see, the confusion is among us for no reason. Or we think the religious people are dogmatic. No, religious people are not dogmatic. I mean, there are religious people who are dogmatic. My point is, there are many sensible, intelligent, Viveki people in the dharmic space. They say, look, when you go to Prayagraj, it is Yamuna and Ganga. And the Saraswati, that great river of Rigveda, it is there in our mind, in a psyche, and it is present there. They will say it is in our Adhyatma. In the Adhyatma space, we have to look at it, not physically. But in academia, I'm also in academia, so don't think like anything against academics. I'm talking against myself. I was at the International Saraswati Conference I've been attended 5, 6, but one in 2017. There was this one person, his question is important. What I'm going to tell you, that kind of stupidity is to be avoided also. So this one person, I mean, I know the name, but name is not important. What he said is very important, and basically a good lessons for what not to do. So he had to explain this Mana Saraswati, the Prayagraj Saraswati, Gujarat Saraswati. I will end on that. This is the last question anyways. Do you know what he presented? This was at Kurukshetra University. He said, guys, I'm going to solve all these problems. So he says, When Saraswati in the Kurukshetra disappeared, okay, it jumped to Mana. Now, Mr. Viewer say, oh, really? Okay, it jumped to Mana. Then immediately, since you have been to Mana, it immediately becomes Lupta, right? It just disappears. Now, it disappeared. He says it disappeared from there and went to Prayagraj. How did it go? It entered Yamuna, then went all the way to Prayagraj. Okay. But now there is one in Saraswati in the Gujarat also. What to do with that? So he says, then it went there further, and I forgot the river, either a Shon river or something. Just like a fish goes upstream, that Saraswati entered Shon or Chambal or whatever and went back to the border of Aravali Hills or something, where the Chambal begins. From there, it jumped again because now it can jump once, it can jump twice. It jumped into the Gujarat area and entered the Gujarat Saraswati. Okay. Now, some people at the Kurukshetra, I mean, and there were some Padma Shri, Padma Bhushan, Padma Vibhushan, and cool listening. Maybe they're listening to this nonsense for a very long time. Actually, I recorded that guy afterwards. I said, can you please explain me again what you did? And I had this recording, but now it's gone, Now, this is the kind of utter nonsense. And what it does, the few serious researchers who do the serious research, it gets blemished. It gets mixed with that. Simple example is everyone knows Srikhanda here. Everyone likes Srikhanda. Imagine you have 50 kilogram of good Srikhanda and you mix it with 2 kilograms of spoiled Srikhanda. Nicely. Now what do you have? 52 kilograms of spoiled Srikhanda. Okay, thank you.
Anyway, friends, before we end, I would like to thank one more scholar here who has donated his books to our institute. Sir, we are grateful to you. Your books have been used by many students doing PhD. So thank you very much. Full. I thought it's a great opportunity. You are here. Please come. Thank you very much.
So what it tells you is that there are great people in Atlanta.
Yes, both of them are. And some connection with Thane also.
That was very productive series of question and answers, and this session was very much successful in igniting curiosity in our young minds. I can assure you that, sir. So thank you so much for that. I would now proceed to the formal vote of thanks. So before we wrap up, I would like to thank on behalf of Institute for Oriental Studies. I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Nilesh Oak, sir, for sharing his insights and expertise with us today. I thank Dr. Vijay Bedekar sir for his constant support and guidance. I thank Principal Dr. Suchitra Naik madam for her encouragement. I would also like to thank dignitaries of Vidya Prasarak Mandal present today and esteemed citizens of the city. I would also like to express gratitude to our attentive audience. Your presence and participation have enriched the discussion and made this event a success. Special thanks to Professor Ankur Kane sir and all the volunteers who contributed to the success of this program. I thank BRIMS for their cooperation, support, and for making this auditorium available to us. Special thanks to the server room team for all the arrangements. Lastly, a big thank you to everyone who attended and contributed to the positive atmosphere. Thank you once again. We will conclude today's program with Pasaidan. So I declare that we have concluded this program here. Thank you so much, everyone.